We now invite Tejasvi Surya to deliver the keynote address. Although Surya needs no introduction, he is amongst the youngest parliamentarians in the country, elected when he was only 28 years old. From Bengaluru South, the Silicon Valley of India, he has made several important policy interventions ever since. He also heads the Bharatiya Janata Yuva Morcha, the largest youth political organization in the world.
Namaste to all of you present here. My special pranams to the Honorable Home Minister of Puducherry and a force behind our party's victory and formation of government here in the state, Shri Ramasivamji. At the very outset, I would want to thank the organizers of the Pondy Lit Fest, Parthoji, Aloji, and the very young Ajit Datta, for having put together a literature festival in the southern part of India, which has attracted the attention of those who matter in crafting the country's socio-political, cultural, economic discourse. Not once, not twice, but continuously for 4 years. And like Kanchanda mentioned in his message, this has become an annual event that all those who love this country's culture and this country's way of life look forward to. On behalf of all of you, I once again congratulate and thank the organizers and the whole team of Pondy Lit Fest for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to share a few words today. The theme for this year's literature festival is Bharat Shakti. In the context of India's growing social, economic, political prowess and the practical and real strategic autonomy that India has managed to achieve in the recent years. There perhaps could not have been a better time than now to discuss and deliberate upon this very important subject right after the nation has successfully concluded presiding over the G20 and having stamped its indelible contribution at the global level. Just in the last few weeks, we have reached the south pole of the moon. Our athletes have got glory to us at important international events. The country has signed memorandum of understandings with at least 8 different countries to be the knowledge partner in digital public goods infrastructure knowledge sharing. And all of this is only an indication of a country on the rise. The last 9 years has marked the country's social, economic, cultural, and political growth in an unprecedented manner. If one were to ascertain the causes, the reasons behind this growth, the consolidation of our strength, there will be many, but one of the foremost of them is undeniably the stable political leadership that Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi has provided to the country over the last 9 years. The difference between this leadership and the leadership that preceded the Prime Minister is that this is a strong leadership, and strength respects strength. This is a leadership that is rooted in Indian culture. This is a leadership that is not hesitant to take risks. This is a leadership that understands the DNA and the pulse of this nation. The troika of stable political leadership, a strong demographic dividend, as well as a geopolitical order where India has played an important role, has greatly contributed to the country achieving in practical terms, in real terms, what we now call as strategic autonomy. Before I go on to share a few instances, which of course is of public knowledge, common knowledge to all of us, which clearly demonstrates India's real strength, political strength at the global table, it is necessary to understand that this quest of strategic autonomy was what was the principal motivation behind India's quest for freedom. And perhaps the best person to have articulated this vision even before India attained independence was none other than Sri Aurobindo. Sri Aurobindo, in 1909, which is almost a few decades earlier to the Congress leadership of then making a case for Purna Swarajya, makes this articulation of the vision of India's freedom. He says, and I quote, our ideal is that our ideal is that of Swarajya, or absolute autonomy, free from foreign control. We claim the right of every nation to live its own life by its own energies, according to its own nature and ideals. We reject the claim of aliens to force upon us a civilization inferior to our own, or to keep us out of our inheritance on the untenable ground of a superior fitness. While admitting the stains and defects which long subjection has induced upon our native capacity, we are conscious of that capacity and energy reviving in us. Therefore, the vision of our rishis was to achieve a level of strategic autonomy where we could make choices both at the domestic level as well as at the international level, which was free from foreign control. The last 9 years, I would say, has been the very first attempt by Bharatiyas to politically, culturally, socially, and economically craft a discourse create institutions, navigate the geopolitical waters in an unapologetic fashion towards realizing this vision of Sri Aurobindo and such rishis of the nation. Let us take just 2-3 examples, some at the domestic level, some at the international level, which just demonstrates how the country has made this unapologetic quest. For a very long time, the discourse around handling issues of terrorism in the country was confined, limited, constrained, and bound by domestic vote bank politics. As a result, a battle against terrorism or a zero tolerance approach towards terror was seen as an attack on a particular community. This, unfortunately, resulted in a political system, a law and order system, where the state could not act strongly, decisively to protect its own citizens. Recollect the days 9 years ago, a decade ago, when at will terror organizations were creating havoc in different parts of the country. Whenever a Hindu festival was around, whether it was in Chennai, whether it was in Guwahati, Coimbatore, Bangalore, Delhi, Ahmedabad, we would hear of terror attacks taking place. In the last 9 years, because we have got out of this ideological trap of confusing zero tolerance on terror to mean an attack on a particular community, the country has come out of this soft-handed approach towards terror, and in the last 9 years, there has not been a single casualty for terror outside of conflict zones in the country. When I was in college and was an activist of the Akhil Bharatiya Vidyarthi Parishad, every other week, we would organize one or the other protest against the then UPA government for their mishandling of red terror. The Naxals, with support, of course, from outside of the border, dreamt of creating a red corridor from Pashupati to Tirupati. Today, Naxal violence is unheard of in the country, and whatever little activity of Naxalism is taking place is restricted to 2 or 3 districts in the country, and this whole vision of the Naxalites of creating a corridor from Pashupati to Tirupati is a pipe dream. Naxal violence is a thing of yesterday in India because, again, the political discourse and economic discourse and the cultural discourse is out of this ideological clutches. This is another example of how the country has deftly managed to handle the internal security issues which plagued the country for a long time. The Shyama Prasad Mukherjee Award was bestowed. Article 370 and 35A was a legacy issue that plagued this country for almost 7 decades. The governments that came earlier did not want to address it because the mentality was to not solve problems, but the mentality and approach was only to postpone problems. And the world takes notice of a government that is decisive. And whether it was our action of abrogating or inoperating Article 370, whether it was our decisive action to end left terror, whether it was iron-handed approach towards handling religious terror, all of these were an indication to the world that this country's leadership at this point in time means serious business. And this decisiveness also was reflected at the global level when we started dealing with different nations of the world. The one important principle of foreign policy that again Sri Aurobindo so perceptibly had mentioned as early as 1903 was the principle that at the geopolitical table, it's only strength that attracts strength, and it's only strength that respects strength. I would want to quote him again. This is what he says. The first thing and the last thing that we must seek, the one essential thing, is strength. These were the words of Sri Aurobindo. So when we sought strength in the last few years economically, by lifting the largest number of people out of poverty in the shortest period of time known to global history in a democratic nation, 13.5 crore people were lifted out of poverty in the last 7 years under the Narendra Modi government. And we did so in a fully functional, vibrant, dynamic democracy. We have now shown to the world, to those who came to preach us democracy, we have now shown to them that democracy delivers and democracy can deliver. Just look at these numbers. In absolute terms, the number of poor in India is today estimated to be less than 60 million. Half of what the number was in 2017. Half of what the number was in 2017. A third of what it was in 2015. Less than a quarter of what existed in 2012. This is the pace at which India has been able to usher in economic prosperity for its people. What has this translated into? The poor, for the first time in India, more than 50 crore people got access to bank accounts. The formalization of the Indian economy, access to basic products like insurance, starts with a bank account. And it's beyond our comprehension to even understand that almost 7 decades after the country's independence, about 50% of the country's population didn't even have access to as basic a necessity as a bank account. 50% of the country's population. 10 crore people have got access to toilets for the first time. 9 crore people have got access to LPG connections and cleaner fuel for the first time. 6 crore people have got access to a roof over their head for the first time. So the poor of India have benefited the most from the country's economic growth. So has the middle class. And we have Monica ji here, who has been trying to educate a lot of people in financial literacy. And these numbers will surely indicate to all of us how this economic prosperity, which has trickled down to the poorest of Indian, has also helped a lot of middle class in India to increase their savings. Over the past 2 years, on an average, 22 lakh new mutual funds accounts linked to SIP were opened each month in India. Just in July and August of this year, a record 36 lakh new SIP accounts were opened. 15,800 crore was invested. The middle class in India is also thriving. Now, this economic prosperity that was created has translated into India now negotiating from a position of strength, dealing with a position of strength when it comes to international policy. We are today the world's fastest growing economy. We are also the world's fifth largest economy, and we are poised to be the world's third largest economy, and we are surely on the path to be or achieve, if all goes well with all our efforts, the $30 trillion economy mark and a 20,000 per capita income mark by 2047. Now, what is this helping us at the global level? I was in Norway a couple of weeks ago. The Norwegian government is extremely keen to learn from India, collaborate with India on replicating the country's digital public goods infrastructure to usher in prosperity and ease of delivery of government services. And Norway is not just one country doing this. Just yesterday, in the cabinet, 4 countries, not just from the global south, but also advanced countries in terms of their per capita incomes, have gotten into a memorandum of understanding with the Indian government to enable this in their nations. For the first time ever, the world is seeing a model where governments are not just building physical infrastructure, because all of these years governments build roads, governments build bridges, airports. This is the first model in the world which is replicable and replicable at scale, at population levels, where governments have built digital infrastructure. So this is going to be an extremely important export from India, which is going to strengthen leverage of India at the global level. We are seeing this in action today. The Startup India campaign, the Make in India campaign, all of this is bearing fruit. And the most important outcome of all of this is the West is not seeing India today as just a market, but India is seen today as a potential manufacturing hub and a very important node in the supply chain logistics of the world. This is a very important step towards our strategic autonomy. While this is something that we have achieved at the economic level, we have also shown to the world that this is a country today that does not bend to global pressures and global lobbies, howsoever big it may be. Take the example of how the country managed COVID. Because the world was watching, because the world did not have a template to follow or a prior experience to follow in terms of managing a pandemic of this scale. The country effectively managed a continental scale vaccination rollout, backed effectively again by technology. And most importantly, when the international lobbies, the pharma lobbies, tried to arm twist our government, whether it was the Moderna or the Pfizer vaccines, and also not to forget their marketing agents in the opposition, when all of them tried to arm twist the government, to waive off the indemnity clause, to make available a free market here, the country did not budge. The leadership did not budge. This was just another indication that this is a government that deals with strength, that this is a new India that is not timid, that this is a new India that is ambitious, that is audacious, and that wants to deal with the world in a position of strength. This was an indication. The second indication came very recently again, and the world took note of it. When India passed the Digital Data Protection Act, all of you, I'm sure, were following the news of how many countries and these trillion-dollar deep-pocketed multinational companies were trying to make sure that no data localization takes place in India. There was a very serious threat to India being reduced to a data colony. But the government very clearly mentioned, and this is the act today, that all personal data will be processed in India. No Googles of the world, no Facebooks of the world, none of these big countries which were trying to, on behalf of these countries, trying to lobby and trying to water down these legislations and provisions succeeded. This was another indication the world took note of, that this is a country that wants to deal as an equal. Look at how we have dealt with our foreign policy at multiple levels. All of these things that I'm telling you is not something novel. All of this is in public domain. For a very long time, India's foreign policy was also bound by the pressures of domestic politics. Even though Israel has been one of our biggest supporters, we never acknowledged or mainstreamed our relationship with Israel because we were worried that the local vote bank here may hurt us. For the first time, we established strong relationships with Israel as well as with the Arab world. The reason for that is the country is dealing with a foreign policy from a position of strength. The beauty of this is in how the Prime Minister went to Israel with the Arab nations providing for the airspace, and how he landed in Palestine accompanied by Israeli helicopters. This perhaps is the biggest indication of how India has been able to engage at a multipolar level. The country today cannot be bracketed. The country today cannot be hyphenated. India cannot be seen today as another nation which is another vassal state or a package deal with, say, the US or with Russia or any other bloc. We are talking to Russia. We are also engaging with the West. We are part of the Quad. We are also part of the SCO. We are dealing with Israel, but we are also building and rather reviving the longest trade route, the earliest trade route known to man, known to civilization, by building the India, Middle East, Europe corridor. Our relationships are strong with Ukraine as well as with Russia. And the reason why we have been able to do all of this, accomplish all of this, I go back to saying this again. The position of strength, the position of confidence from which India is dealing with this thing today. Even in our economic policy, our leadership and our country is taking decisions which is rooted in the realities of this country's economics. I'm sure all of you were following the political discourse in 2019, 2020, when all around the world there was immense pressure on governments to print money and distribute cash. Perhaps India was the only economy of this scale which did not follow that route. It would have been very easy for the nation to print money and distribute cash. We helped our people in kind, but we realized the fallacy of following that economic policy. And today, while those countries are struggling with double-digit inflation and supposed economic rock stars who prescribed these policy prescriptions for India, well, they have now gone into hiding, or rather seen in podcasts with Rahul Gandhi. The ones who were rooted to this country's economics, the country's realities, the likes of which Swarajya today honored, they navigated this country's economy during a pandemic, and even this is an economic model for the world to follow today. So all of these are an indication that India is today taking decisions not influenced by A or B, but it is primarily furthering its own interests. And I come to ask myself, where did this country get this confidence from, which was clearly absent a decade ago? Where did we get this confidence from to deal with the world, deal with these crises, deal with these legacy problems in this manner? And I have no inhibition in saying this, that the reason why this country today is deriving so much of strength is because the country, for the first time at a political level, social level, economic level, is staying true to its Swadharma. And what is this Swadharma? Centuries of colonization had instilled in us a very deep sense of inferiority complex, where we look to the West, where we look to others and outside for validation. We were not confident in our own skin. And the greatest message, the central message of the Gita that Sri Krishna provides the world and Arjuna, through Arjuna, was Swadharme nidhanam shreyaha paradharmo bhayavaha. Stay true to yourself. Stay true to your own nature. Stay true to who you are. This is the central message of the Gita. Again, as early as 1902, Sri Aurobindo mentions this very message in these very words. And I quote, "If India becomes an intellectual province of Europe," listen to the power of these words. "If India becomes an intellectual province of Europe, she will never attain to her natural greatness or fulfill the possibilities within her. Paradharmo bhayavaha. To accept the dharma of another is perilous. It is self-defeating. It deprives the man or the nation of its secret of life, the very vitality, and substitutes an unnatural and stunted growth for the free, large, and organic development of nature." For 70 long years after independence, the colonial attitude of subservice, of servitude, of, in very colloquial language, log kya kahenge? And in this, the log was not our own people, this padosi auntie. It was log kya kahenge was BBC. It was what the New York Times will say, what the Guardian will say. This log kya kahenge attitude determined the country's foreign policy, it determined the country's economic policy, it determined how we were dealing with Naxalism, it was determining how we were dealing with India's poor. This intellectual slavery cost the nation dear the last 70 years. Today, we see many green shoots, some examples of how concertedly we have tried to come out of this intellectual colonial slavery. Take just two examples. Just outside, when I was looking at the stalls, one of our friends said that they have been working on the Indian knowledge systems. There is Sampadanandaji sitting here, and they gifted me a few books saying that, "Sir, for how long should we be studying London Bridge is falling down, London Bridge is falling down?" I still remember a very um, pictures incident in my mind when I was traveling to some hinterland of Karnataka a few years ago, almost a decade ago, when I was working as a Vidyarthi Parishad activist. I happened to visit a farmer's house in the central part of Karnataka. I was talking to him. It was around 4:30 in the evening. The farmer's son comes back from school, promptly goes inside, changes from his uniform, takes his book, starts doing his homework. The farmer, gets really angry. And he starts telling him, "Volgade hogu," in Kannada, meaning just go inside and do whatever you want. And I was stunned because this guy looked like an Adarsh Balak, coming home after school, changing, taking books, starting his homework. Then I asked the farmer, "Father, why are you scolding him?" He said, "The last 3 years, there is no rains in the city. There is no rains in our village. There is not a particular God left to whom we have not done a vrat or something, we have not prayed to. But this goddamn son of mine comes back from this convent and every single evening starts saying, 'Rain, rain, go away, little Johnny wants to play.'" Neither the rain, rain, go away, nor the little Johnny had anything to do with India's culture. But for a very long time, this was what was taught to us as enlightened education. For the very first time, look at this. I come from a state which is just a few hundred kilometers from here. And when Namasivamji was speaking in Tamil and I was trying to very concertedly trying to understand what he was saying, I could make out that there is so much of word that is very common between Tamil and Kannada. But unfortunately, here we are sitting in the Pondy Lit Fest communicating in English, a colonizer's language. Because the Congress Party's national education policy, starting from Nehru, followed later by Indira Gandhi, and promptly followed later by Rajiv Gandhi, was a Hindi imposition and an English imposition language policy. It never gave space for a flowering of Indian languages. For the first time, the national education policy of 2020 makes space for learning and teaching in the mother tongue. This is a very big shift from the Macaulay's education system. This is achieving strategic autonomy at a cultural level, at our finding our own level. This coming out of the Macaulay's trap is not just restricted to the education sector. On the last day of the last parliament session, the Honorable Home Minister Amit Shah ji introduced 3 important legislations governing India's criminal legal framework, which seeks to move away from, again, the Macaulay's era Indian IPC, CRPC and the Indian Evidence Act. It took 70 years for the nation to start making laws which are made in Bharat, made by Bharat, and made for Bharatiyas. This is a very important journey that the country has taken at a political level, at a policy making level. But this doesn't mean to say that there is no residues left of this colonial mindset. Just a few days ago on Twitter, I'm sure all of you would have seen, there was a section which was really troubled by the fact that our Prime Minister couldn't hold a wine glass properly or couldn't toast properly. Because for them, which Kanchanda referred to as the irrelevant chatterati, politics as well as economic cultural discourse could be taken seriously only when it came from their de-rooted Anglosphere. When the Prime Minister goes abroad and speaks in chaste Hindi and wears our kurta and pajama, he is making a statement that India, Bharat as Bharat has arrived at a global stage. This is an indication that the country is staying true to its Swadharma, is making an attempt to go to its Swadharma. I only want to say this, that while all of these are important steps that we have taken, there of course is a considerable amount of challenges in the coming years. In conclusion, I want to highlight one or two of these challenges that perhaps may be of serious issue to our growth, or rather areas, I would rather put it this way, that these are areas that we should focus on in the coming years with all of our dedication and efforts. Even as we speak and celebrate the fact that India today is the fastest growing economy in the world, it is very important for us to continue this economic momentum so that the large number of people who are dependent today on various government schemes for their support, for their livelihood, they become financially more secure. The dream of the $20,000 per capita income economy, that is something that we cannot at any cost lose sight of, because that is going to give the country even more strength to be dealing at a global level. Whatever work we have done to incentivize manufacturing through PLI schemes and others need to be strengthened. More needs to be done, of course, to secure the country's energy security, because in the coming years, even when we are progressing on our developmental journey, the demands for resources, the demand for energy is only going to become higher and higher. Our dependency on fossil fuels cannot be as it is today. Which is why in this context you must see 2 or 3 important international alliances the country has tried to introduce and lead, whether it is the International Solar Alliance, whether it is the International Biofuel Alliance, or whether it is the National Hydrogen Mission. All of these are in the direction of maintaining the country's economic and energy security. Even while we are focusing on that, we must also be aware that in this era of rapidly changing technology, the country needs to be ahead of the curve in all areas of emerging technology. Whether it's Web 3.0, whether it is Web 4.0, whether it is 5G, whether it is 6G, whether it's quantum computing. In all of these areas, the country needs to stay ahead of the curve. And not just stay ahead of the curve, also be an important voice at the global level at standard setting bodies and standard setting agencies. Already, it gives us great pride, great confidence that whether it is the international regulatory framework that is discussing multilateral banking, whether it is discussing cryptocurrency, whether it is considering regulation of artificial intelligence, India is a very important voice in the world today. It gives us confidence, but more needs to be done. Because those are areas which are going to, of course, give us, which is going to greatly impact every single human being on the world. The rapidly changing technological space. While all of this is at the material level, There is, of course, the big threat that if we lose or if we slip from the political pedestal, we may slip back to those days of colonial mentality. We may slip back to those days where deriding our culture was a thing of every day. Just a few hundred kilometers from where we are today, a very prominent leader of the ruling party in Tamil Nadu gave a clarion call for the eradication of Sanatan Dharma, which is the Swadharma of this nation. These are also the threats, the residues of the colonial depravity which still exists. And that is something that we must stay aware of and guard ourselves against. I would only want to say this in conclusion to give us all hope, to give us all pride that there may be threats that may come from within or from outside. But as long as we remain true to our Swadharma, as long as we remain true to our roots, there can be no power or no force on earth that can shake us or trouble us or defeat us in any way. This was the vision that Sri Aurobindo again gave. With his words, which is a message of action, which is not a message of timidity or trepidation, but is a clarion call for ambition, audaciousness, of strength and vitality. I want to leave all of you with this very important quote of his, which perhaps will be the guiding light for all of us for the next few centuries, as we all make our efforts to craft the destiny of this country. When therefore it is said that India shall rise, it is the Sanatana Dharma that shall rise. When it is said that India shall be great, it is the Sanatana Dharma that shall be great. When it is said that India shall expand and extend herself, it is the Sanatana Dharma that shall expand and extend itself all over the world. It is for the Dharma and by the Dharma that India exists. With this reflection of Sri Aurobindo's message of staying true to our roots, to staying true to our own energy, to our own nature, because that is what is going to give us the spiritual energy, the perennial energy needed to fulfill this destiny of the country. Let us all hope that His blessings and the divine strength will guide us all in this very important quest of rebuilding this very important civilization. Thank you so much. Bharat Mata Ki Jai.